one of the things that separates living from dead is pliability, right? Things that are dead, when a tree dies, it becomes brittle. It's very easy to snap. There's no flow of vital fluid, of vital force through that material anymore. Similarly, when animals and humans die, there's a dryness and a brittleness that comes to the body before we return to the land. And this is an important concept to meditate on when we think about generosity. Recently, we did a class on becoming plant-like, learning virtues and ethics directly from our plants. I'll link to that class down in the details below. And as I've been kind of meditating on this and thinking about it, I think that generosity is one of the most important of those virtues that we can learn and emulate from the plants, right? This word generous, generosity, to be generous, comes from a proto-indo-european root, gena, G-E-N-E, which also is the root of the word generate, right? Or genera, or genealogy as well, right? It talks about how we create what comes next, how we create our own progeny, how we generate ideas and changes in the world, how we generate movement, and things, again, staying pliable and alive rather than brittle and dead. So generosity then is not transactional, as we've talked about in other classes. It's about keeping things moving, right? Just how we talk about sacred reciprocity, the idea that reciprocity should not be a single transaction. It should not be, I give so that you will give, end of transaction. It's I give so that you may give, so that I may give, so that you may give, right? It's a cycle, it's a flow. And similarly, generosity should be that same way. If we think about the conceptualization of the cosmos as the tree, the world tree, the cosmic tree, the central axis, however you want to think about it, that tree has to stay alive. The minute there's brittleness and dryness, things start snapping and falling apart and breaking. The patterns start unwinding in a really devastating and chaotic way. When the tree stays alive, it's able to grow and adapt and transform and move in the direction of harmony. And this is good, right? When we see things becoming stale and stagnant and diseased and disharmonized, that is a product of a lack of generation, a lack of creation function. So generosity then is the giving to other people, to other situations, to the world, to ourselves, to our allies, in order to keep things fresh, to keep things fed, to keep things moisturized and nourished and fluid and moving. The opposite of that is not giving, is hoarding and withholding, right? Which does not feed, it starves. Which does not give, it constricts, it cuts off. And then things die. They become brittle and they die. So in this work, generosity on all the levels is key. And I will say this, when you are around plant people, and I'm not saying only plant people, right? This is just from personal experience. When you are around plant people, people who are deeply invested in working with plants, plants make up a big part of their spiritual practice. In some way, they're walking a plant spirit or a plant-informed path, right? You will never meet more generous people. And in fact, I would say that a person's free-flowing generosity is a good indicator of how connected they are to the way of plants, because it's impossible to be around plants and not learn generosity. Who in the world is more generous than plants, right? Constantly giving, constantly forgiving, constantly providing without rancor. They're exemplary, ideal embodiment of generosity. So plant people and lots of spiritual people are the most generous because they understand that through their generosity, through what they generate, through how they give and support other people and feed the forest, they strengthen themselves, right? There's always a little bit of selfishness in everything. That's just nature, human nature especially. But they understand that things are more beautiful that way, that uh, communities and individuals and ideas are nourished and kept pliable, and they're able, like a tree, to grow in new directions, to follow the sun, right? To go where they need to go where the path of least resistance or the path of greatest beauty and harmony is, rather than be stuck, dried out, brittle, and stagnant in one position that no longer serves. This is also the way that generosity ties into our ancient animist perspectives and experiences, right? That we're always in the moment, that everything that we receive from our teachers, from our spirit allies, is relevant for when and where and who and how we are as people. We're informed by the folklore, but we understand that folklore is also a tree that grows wild, and that it will move in new ways as it needs to accommodate the present situation that we're in. When we freeze ourselves in time, right? When we say there was a specific moment where this thing was said, and even though it was thousands of years ago, we have to adhere to it exactly as it was said, even though it was for a totally different time and people and perspective and place. That's brittleness, right? That is not allowing for things to continue to grow, to continue to adapt. And we get into some trouble, right? As you probably can guess with that. So generosity, very important. We can fake it until we make it, like all of the virtues. We can step into the stream of generosity as a guest and try to learn how it feels to take whatever we truly own, our wisdom, our experiences, our time, our energy, our compassion, our presence, our response, and give that freely to other people. Even in cases where it's not literally free, like maybe it's a service rendered or a product or something, there's still a way to be generous with that, right? To have something attached to it that's a greater depth than maybe what people are expecting. This is like something we're all capable of. Generosity is something that we can all give and that we can all learn to receive, right? You have to sort of try to participate in the whole thing. And for me, it's a struggle, right? I don't think that it really comes easy for anybody these days, especially folks, where I am. We're trained into these concepts of transactional capitalism and all that. So we have to learn how to receive freely and how to give freely and not really worry about the repercussions of that, right? That everything's going to be okay. So this one's a little rambly, but generosity and I would say reciprocity, and they go hand in hand, right? The most important virtue that we can learn from the plants. And when it comes to broad spiritual practice, for example, in the tradition that I practice, the old faith, the old ways, the fairy faith, generosity is simply the thing that's the most respected. Being generous with one's respect, being generous with one's contemplation of space, being generous with how somebody shows up and how somebody takes and how somebody influences, but also being generous with gift and with acknowledgement and with praise and with telling the stories. For plants, one of the greatest generosities we can do for the plants that they seem to really appreciate and love is just talking about them, just sharing what we know about them with other people, telling their stories, sharing our experiences. So, it's at the core of all nature-based spiritualities. It may be difficult to find in a non-transactional way in some of the modern religions and traditions, but the old ones, this is key. Generosity and reciprocity, very, very important. So if you haven't watched that other class on being plant-like, we talk about a bunch of other virtues, right? So again, I'll link to that down below. with that, I will send you out with blessings of generous peace and plenty. See you next time.